So we've heard a lot about native advertising, various flavors of it, how brands can work with media, how brands can be their own media organizations. Can they? Or does it work better if you have the help of an experienced storytelling media organization behind you? Well, someone to give us some insight into that is the director of the T-Brand Studio International at the New York Times. So please welcome Kaylee King-Balentine. Kaylee.
Okay, last session before break. Let's get people moving. Can I get a show of hands? Who in the audience is from a publisher? All right. Who in the audience is from a brand? Okay, and anyone from agencies, media, creative? Cool, all right. So, first off, thank you for having me. It's very exciting to be here and be in Berlin for the first time. And so I want to talk you a little bit through the New York Times, what we do. I don't think I'm going to spend a lot of time on it. I think most people are very familiar with our brand. But we are increasingly becoming a more global company. We report from an average of 170 countries each year. In fact, I think it would be difficult to find a country that we have not reported in from the last 5 years. So speaking to the amount of journalism that we actually create as a company, every day we write what is equivalent to a Harry Potter novel. Every week we write Shakespeare's full works, and every 8 months we write the Encyclopedia Britannica. So what does this have to do with branded content? Brands were coming to us saying, we love what your newsroom is doing. Do you think you could ask them to tweak that content so it fit with my brand's message? Of course, the publishers in the room know that is a very touchy subject when talking to a journalist. So our answer was T-Brand Studio. The church and state line is very, very strong at the New York Times. We are very clear about us being our own team sitting in the advertising department. So what we did was, we built a team, and we built a team that was full of journalists, ex-journalists, video team, designers. Most of our designers come from a publishing background. We have a development team that actually works with the newsroom, sharing code. And I think importantly to note, we have what's called an account services team in the T-Brand Studio. So we're a very editorially driven team. However, we have that group of folks on the team that a lot of them come from media agencies, creative agencies. They know how to get a campaign going from a kickoff call, which I just got off about 10 minutes ago with a client, to launch, which will happen in a couple of months. So this risk that we took 2 years ago has paid off. We have launched just over 120 campaigns. One of our first campaigns, which was done with Netflix for the launch of Orange is the New Black Season 2, was sort of our coming out party. It got a lot of respect in the industry, and I think that was due to the fact that it was storytelling driven. We have worked with over 100 brands, so we're having some people come back to us, which is really, really exciting. So you'll see some of the brands that we've worked with here to get a sense. So they're kind of all over the place, from a yogurt brand to Goldman Sachs. So enough with the numbers. I'm going to walk you through a couple of case studies and explain to you how we got there. We worked with Ben & Jerry's this year. Ben & Jerry's is an example of our bread and butter in the studio. So Ben & Jerry's, they do a lot of great work in speaking about their philanthropic activity. This piece that we did specifically was about climate change and how it affects lower income households worse off. We did a documentary film with a family in Staten Island who had been hit by Hurricane Sandy. 4 years later, they still do not have any electricity. We wrote a piece, we did infographics, and this was really an awareness piece. So it's an example of how brands sometimes come to us and say, we want you to draw awareness to something that we are doing as a brand that we're really proud of, not necessarily about the brand itself. There we go. We also get a lot of brands who come to us with a lot of data and white papers, and they say to us, can you make all of this data sexy? And so we say, of course we can. So Shell, for example, they have a scenarios team that did a big white paper essentially on how populations will grow in the future and what cities will look like and what their archetypes are like. So we took that information, we exploded it into infographics, into 2 documentary films. You know, we walked around the streets of Detroit, we flew a drone in the fields, really brought this flat, interesting PDF to life in a digital way, shareable way. So we get a lot of brands that say, okay, I see what you're doing, native advertising is fantastic, I love the storytelling, but it's not about my brand enough. So Volvo, for example, came to us and said, we have this Vision 2020 plan. And this plan is that by 2020, we don't want anyone to be seriously injured or die in a Volvo. So we said, okay, how are we gonna bring this sort of weighty, big overall campaign story to life in a relatable way that works for the New York Times audience? So what we did was we got to work studying Volvo. So we spent quite a bit of time really getting to know them, learning about the way that they work, learning how they make their vehicles safer. And what we found was they have a team in Gothenburg, Sweden, that is a crash crew. And whenever a Volvo crashes within a 60-mile radius of Gothenburg, Volvo gets a phone call. And they are invited out to the crash site to see how their cars can be made safer, how they can improve at their jobs. And so for us, as journalists, as filmmakers, we're sitting there going, that's a great story. That's a great story for the automotive community, but that's also a great story for the New York Times reader and for a much wider audience. So this is an approach in the studio that we call story mining, because I think we're still at a point where brands aren't quite comfortable with being adjacent to a story, and our approach to that is, okay, well, let's look inside of your brand and see if there is a story. Let's do an investigative piece, essentially, of your brand that we know will be entertaining for our audience. CA Tech is an example that is similar to Shell. CA Tech wanted to explain what an API was. I think it's a term a lot of people throw around, but a lot of people don't understand what it is. So what we did was we made a fun interactive tool online that explained it. Our developer actually used the code that he had created for his senior thesis, and it was fun. And the end result, actually, they projected it in JFK Airport as a big interactive. GE, lastly, I will talk about a very exciting one for us in the studio. GE wanted us to talk about how they're developing in machine-to-machine communication. So what we did was we took a look at one of the stories that our newsroom had actually done about nature and how species in nature communicate with each other. For example, the snakes warn the frogs when it's about to flood. So what we did was we created a virtual reality film, and it was all about how nature speaks to each other and how GE is incorporating that into their company. We did a 360 film that lived online. We did a paid post that was adjacent to the virtual reality film, and the day that the virtual reality film launched, 1.3 million Google Cardboards landed on the doorsteps of our New York Times subscribers. So within our virtual reality app, the native content sits directly with the editorial content, so the editorial team is constantly shooting virtual reality. We are constantly working on virtual reality in the studio, so it feels very much like it fits together. So I'm gonna stop talking for a second and just show you a reel of some of the stuff that we have worked on in the last 2 years.
Þær koma í bylgjum, nokkra saman. Næturnar þegar ég dofna upp, get ekki sofið.
literally, we were told over and over it could not be done.
I get a real visceral, emotional excitement when I see something really beautiful.
It's that personal attention to detail that really helps differentiate us from any other experience out there.
It's not a buzzword, it's not a program, it's really what we do. It's everything we do.
The most incredible thing that's happened to me is that it is my version of a fairy tale.
A lot of love, a lot of dedication has been put into ensuring that your experience is everything you want it to be, as well as what we are proud of.
That's the difference between a good brand and a great brand.
It's a great sense of gratification at the end of the day that you got it done.
So although these campaigns all look quite a bit different, it is important to note that the common denominator is the story. We are finding more and more that the pieces that we are creating, the ones that have a real story and are authentic and relatable and have a soul, are the ones that are performing the best. A good example of this is a program that we did at the end of last year with Philips. Philips is moving away from being known as a light bulb company, and they are now a healthcare tech giant. They wanted us to bring to light that pivot and draw awareness to it, but do it through stories. So we worked with the Philips client to identify 3 pillars that they wanted to discuss. One was aging, one was breathing diseases, and one was sleep. And the way we told these stories was with aging, we did a profile of this man up here on my right, the oldest karate master in Okinawa. We also did a film about a village called Ogimi in Japan, where people live till they're very, very old, and they take wonderful care of each other, and they work and live together. For breathing diseases, we took a French professional cyclist to the Col de Galibier and had him ride this Tour de France curve wearing a mask that simulated that he had a breathing disease to prove how tough it is to live with that, even for a professional athlete. And lastly, for sleep, we profiled an Icelandic fisherman who sleeps probably 2 hours a night and lives a pretty dark life because of how terrible it is not sleeping. I want to show you that film. It's about 3 minutes long, and I think you'll be surprised at what you can do with branded content after watching this.
Þær koma í bylgjum, nokkra saman. Næturnar þegar ég dofna upp. Stundum sit ég aleinn og veit að það tilgangslöst að reyna. Get ekki sofið. Í stað þess að sofa tel ég sekúndurnar, mínúturnar og klukkustundirnar þar til morgun rís. Ég hef verið sjómaður í 36 ár. Rétt eins og faðir minn, afi og undan mér. Okkur í blóðborið. Aðstæðurnar eru harðneskjulegar. Á Íslandi er allra veðra von. Þegar fiskurinn gefur sig, þá mætum við og höfum ekkert val. Stundum erum við út á sjó alltaf 7 daga í röð og fáum klukkutíma hvíld á sólring. Þetta er erfitt. Þú hugsa samt ekkert það. Einbeitið þig bara vinnunni. Og þá er engin tími til að hvílast. En þegar þú stoppar, þá finnurðu hversu þreyttur þú ert. Eftir svona langan tíma án svefns, loksins þegar þú þarft, þá
Froze. That's okay. You get the point. So it's, pretty dark film, and generally when working with the brands, they want to stay happy, they want to stay positive content. Despite that, this piece has been shared over 200,000 times. It was named a Vimeo staff pick. It's proving to us that people don't necessarily care if content is branded or not. As long as it is good, they will still share it. And it's really, really powerful for a brand to be associated with a great piece of content. Branded content is moving into this great entertainment space where brands are looked at as entertainers. So there's a lot of clutter in our industry, especially with so many publishers now opening studios. So a question that I get a lot is, how do you work with media agencies? How do you work with creative agencies? How do you work with other publishers? And the answer is, we're doing all of it. So I would say about 85% of our work comes from agencies. So a lot of times media agencies are actually lobbying on our behalf with their client because they want to push their clients to do something that's different, that they've never done before, that goes a long way further than display. In terms of how we're working with other publishers, the Philips program is a good example. So T-Brand Studio did the creative, however, we distributed the content across to Forbes, to Washington Post, and to LinkedIn. So a lot of the publishers are making connections, specifically in areas where maybe the New York Times doesn't have the right reach or the local reach. So it's a powerful thing, I think, for publishers to get together and start discussing how we can do this, how we can be multiple parts in one campaign. One thing I will say that a lot of brands, I'm not sure, are quite on board with is that this takes time to make a film, to write an article, to do the rounds of review. It takes a lot of time. We estimate that our branded campaigns, just to do the production, takes somewhere between 8 to 10 weeks. So I'll finish up. I have a couple more slides, but there's some very simple ways to win in branded content. And, I think you just have to follow the rules. Don't ever trick your viewer. We have to be clear about the fact that we are a branded content team. We're a studio team that has journalistic chops, but we are not the newsroom. We get that question all the time. We are not. And also be authentic. be relatable, tell a really great story. Tell the story that you would want to hear. If you start working from that lens, I always like to say, if you take 10 steps back and you think about how you use the internet, what do you want to engage with? What do you want to share? If you start thinking in that way, you're going to create some great content that brands are going to be proud to be next to because people are going to be sharing it. Communicate your message in a sophisticated way. We learned a lot as we started as a studio when we were working with brands where we would say, okay, we're going to make this documentary film or we're going to make this investigative piece. And then throughout our conversation with brands, they would ask us if we could sort of inject their standard creative that they would put in their displays or in their ad units. And of course, that's not, that it just doesn't work. Consumers are smarter than that. So I think where you win is when a brand allows you to tell a great story and also get their brand message across. That's the sweet spot. Lastly, tell a great story. That is, telling stories is the backbone of the New York Times. We've been doing it for 164 years. Our audience expects that of us in the studio, and it's something that we take a lot of pride in as well. Lastly, I want to share with you some numbers justifying why native is a really good way to go for a brand and how you can help convince brands that they should be doing this. 70% of people would rather learn about products through content than traditional ads. Compared to banner ads, native ads generate 82% more brand lift. People view native ads 53% more than banner ads. And importantly, viewers are spending almost as much time on branded content as they are editorial content. And I think the way you get there is just by telling a really, really great story. So we're finding it's up to the brands to become bolder, to take more risks, but we're getting there, and we've had a lot of fun and great successes over the last 2 years that, our own newsroom is reaching out to us and saying, that's incredible, we should have done the story like that, that's great, so congratulations. But that's all I have. Thanks.
Thanks, Kaylee.
Yeah.
Take a question?
Sure.
Yeah? So if we have any questions for Kaylee, do raise your hand. And we've got one straight away down here, if we get a microphone. And usual format, name and company would be great. Thank you.
Hi, Kelly. It's Craig Nicholson, Media 24, South Africa. Thanks for sharing that with us. It's great content. It seems to me it's quite expensive content to manufacture. I was just wondering, do you have a threshold below which you won't entertain the client? First part of the question. Second part of the question, if you are sharing or using other publishers down the line, how do you cost that?
Sure, yeah, so budget, tough question to answer, particularly because we started in New York and we were working off the US budgets for production, finding that now since moving into London, I don't think I mentioned, but we started our studio in London in September as an expansion. We're finding that we're having to revisit the way that we've budgeted because people in the US, of course, they have their big budget that they want to spend on the US market. Outside of the US, it's little regions, specific countries. So we're adjusting our rate card essentially. But to answer your question, we've done campaigns anywhere from $70,000 to $8 million, so kind of runs the gamut. How we cost with other publishers, we're leaving that costing up to the media agency. So the media agency is sort of working with the brand and figuring out how much money we want to put here, how much money we want to put there.
Okay, there might be time for one more if it's a brief one, so do raise your hand and we'll come to you. And over here. That's the peril of sitting right at the front on the press bench, you see.
Hi, Colleen. My name is Wolf. I'm one of those members of a group you haven't mentioned. I'm a journalist. And first thing, just welcome to Berlin.
Thank you.
I'm the head of the German Journalists Association here in Berlin, and we welcome you in this case. My question is very simple. After all the experience you have made in the studio, there will be some feedback or there may be some backlashes for the newsroom. Can you little talk about, maybe they say you're doing a great job, but maybe there are some learnings from what you're doing which may be of interest for the people in the newsroom. Can you give us a little insight on that one? Thank you.
How the newsroom is learning from what we are
Yep.
doing? Oh, interesting. I don't want to speak on behalf of the newsroom, but I think we have had some good conversations with folks in the newsroom on the tech side, but also on the journalism side, of thinking about how to tell a story and get a message across clearer. I mean, the journalists in the newsroom are experts. They're, we all look up to them, but they're coming to us and saying, maybe I wouldn't have told the story that way, maybe I wouldn't have thought of it that way, but it's something that I would look to explore. I mean, I think the biggest one for us was the Netflix piece. We got a lot of comments from the newsroom saying, I don't think I would have approached it that way, but the way you did it was fantastic, and thank you for that. I think they are excited to see that branded content can be genuine, can be interesting, can be fair, and not sort of barking brand messaging.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can I ask you then, please, before we close for our break, to thank Kaylee. Thank you very much.
Thanks.